There we go. We're live. Miro, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. Everyone, we've got Miro here. We're going to be talking about NX workspaces. Let me throw it back up here. Our nx.dev website, where you can check out everything about NX and workspaces. And we'll be diving a bit deeper into some aspects on. I guess this is kind of more like architecture at this point. Wouldn't you say, Miro?
Yeah, I'd say architecture and code organization, but not only code organization, but also kind of project organization. So more of a planning part.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we're going to get into this time. Um, but like before we jump into that, I also wanted to just show off our monorepo.tools website. If you haven't checked it out, make sure you check it out. There's some interesting comparisons here, explanations on what monorepos are. Of course, NX is a monorepo tool. I think it's actually like a lot more than just monorepo stuff too. But I guess the topic we'll be looking at today is mainly looking at that monorepo aspect. Let me throw that in the chat here in case anyone wants to follow along. But yeah, some really cool comparisons between the different tools, including, we got Turbo Repo, Bazel, Lage, Rust, uh,
It's actually pronounced lage. It's a
Log.
Norwegian word. It
Oh,
means build in Norwegian.
yeah, cool. I didn't know that. And Lerna, of course, interesting. I think Victor tweeted recently, NX just surpassed Lerna in terms of npm downloads. Which is a really cool milestone for us at Narwhal because we've had a lot of respect for Lerna and what Lerna was and what Lerna represented to the community, and to like surpass them in downloads was kind of a huge, um, I don't know, it was a huge milestone for us. So
Yeah, definitely. Lerna was a symbol of monorepos in JavaScript world. So having more downloads than Lerna says something about NX.
yeah, for sure. And a lot of respect to them too. Don't want to be like we're better than them now. We got more numbers. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff that NX can do as well. But yeah, Miro, do you want to introduce our topic for today? While you're doing that, I'm going to throw a link to your article here as well too.
Okay. Yeah, you can also share screen it. So today we're going to be talking about mastering code organization or taming code organization with module boundaries. One of the things that we have included in our NX packages is, apart from the linter that gives you a set of best practices based on years of working on large enterprise applications. So we give you a set of rules that should work in most of the cases for most of the projects. Of course, there's a way for you to change that and override if you're not happy with it, but for majority of the project, this should be enough. And it covers different aspects working with JavaScript, with TypeScript, using Angular or React. So we have different sets for different projects. But on top of that, we also provide one custom rule, which was built with NX in mind, and it heavily uses the NX project graph. What it does is actually it allows you to create module boundaries between projects or code constraints. So as your application or your solution grows, you become having more and more applications and more libraries. And at some point, your graph becomes too large for you to monitor what's connected to what. And it's quite easy to make a wrong connection. So to try to connect things that shouldn't be connected, or try to refer to parts of your monorepo that shouldn't be referred to. In order to stop this from happening, in order to bring some sort of structure and control to your solution, there is a way to mark each of your project with a tag, and then you can specify a rule to say which tags can depend on which other tags. And you can do this not only in one dimension, but also in multiple dimensions. So for example, if you just scroll a bit down, Zach, to show this first graph. So let's say we have a graph that looks something like this. So we have two applications. One is store and the other one is admin. And then we have three feature libraries, product that's imported into store, and then sales and invoices that are imported into admin. And then additionally, we have one shared app, which is used almost by everything. And then we have core, which is just used by apps. Now, core is usually something that has, for example, headers, footers, menus. So not something that you necessarily want to have in each feature. And you would like to probably disable feature libraries to load core. Also, since your feature projects will probably have some UI elements, and shared is usually just some helper functions that are used across. And you don't want these shared libraries to have a reference to something that has UI. Additionally, when we look at this graph, it could happen that store and admin have completely different framework. For example, store could be in React and admin could be in Angular. Now just imagine that if admin is in Angular, normally sales and invoices being a feature modules for admin are also using a bunch of Angular stuff. And the same way products being feature project for the store would probably have some hooks and some additional stuff for React. What would happen if you would try to load products from sales? So if you try to load React code into the Angular project and vice versa.
That would be nice, right?
The least it would happen is it wouldn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to avoid these kind of situations.
Yeah,
And
well, I
yeah.
think some of this comes down to me. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think there's something like, one thing I've been thinking a lot is like signal to noise ratio. And like one of the cool things about NX, I think, is the ability to have the depth graph and to be able to look at, what is the like the modular construction of my workspace right now. And if you see what we see here, you're talking about the various dimensions. I think the dimension this particular diagram is showing is illustrated by the colors, right? Like
Yeah.
there's the green is the apps. The orange here is I suppose these are features, and
Yes.
then the gray would be these utils. So we can kind of see this one dimension, and we can see, okay, there's kind of this hierarchy we should expect, where apps should be able to depend on the utilities. Apps should be able to depend on features, and features should not depend on apps. It should be like the flow should go down from app to feature to utils, and apps could potentially take utils directly as well. But we're talking about introducing now a second dimension here, which is not just like what type of lib it is, but also like what framework it belongs to. That's kind of what we're getting into here, right?
Yeah, think of it as a, for example, department in your company. You might have projects that belong to all departments, so something like common UI or some helper functions that each department would benefit from. But on top of that, there is an application and bunch of features linked to this application that only belong to a specific product and thus belong to just a specific department. And you don't necessarily want to mix these together. So you don't want projects to become intertwined to have some references in between, because you want to be able at any point to deploy just your vertical without depending on other verticals being okay or having the same version of the framework or even same framework. So you want to be completely isolated from the other verticals. So on top of this horizontal division where we have, as you said, apps and then features and then utils on bottom, we also can have vertical separation. And it doesn't stop only on two. There can be third dimension as well if there's something you can think of.
Yeah. So like the framework would be one of the obvious ones, front end versus back end. That's one that comes to mind. Also, like you were talking about React versus Angular. But then I think you were getting into this too. There's certain like certain sub organizations inside of your organization. I excuse me, organization. So if you had like I don't know, a banking branch that you wanted, like say, going back to my point about signal to noise, if this products library is only meant to be used by that, by that banking branch of the company and not by, sales or something like that. Right now, at least looking at this graph, there's no way to make that restriction. At least in terms of what we see here. I think that's what you get into. Like that's definitely where tagging can help create those constraints and be able
Yeah.
to enforce them. So
And someone might say that this graph is small and it's quite obvious if you make the wrong connection. And just by checking the graph, you can easily fix this. But first of all, if you only depend on checking the graph, that means you're depending on human factor. And there's always delay before the human actually detects there is an issue. And on top of that, once your solution grows, so imagine this has hundreds of projects, there's no way someone would be able to track these wrong links in between. It's just impossible even to grasp the entire graph. So most of the times we have to cut the graph into small parts in able to comprehend what's going on.
yeah, I mean this is what 7 nodes. I think this is like anything more complicated than this. It's already getting kind of beyond the ability to of like human comprehension. We could probably get up to like 20. We could still have like some grasp on what the web looks like, but even here, just like the connections between shared and everything, it's kind of hard to keep that in like our brain's RAM.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
guess if it can fit the screen and if it has kind of like tree structure, so if it branches normally, then you can still grasp it. But if you have this graph that's kind of convoluted, it's not really a tree, then
yeah.
it's super hard to see what's connected to what. And suddenly you have these branches that are overlapping and it's hard to track what goes where.
Yeah. Well, already in this one we see like this isn't, I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a tree just because admin points to shared as well as one of its children points to shared. So it's hard to, I don't know. Kind of messes with my comprehension a little bit. But yeah, there's just to point it out too, with the NX depth graph, because I do think there's actually some value in pulling this up and looking at it as a human.
Mm.
And the depth graph tool that we have now, Philip's been working on it, and there's some really great features in our depth graph that make it interactive, where we can actually filter things out to, explicitly the pieces that you're interested in. So even if you have that massive graph with like thousands of nodes in it, thousands of libraries, you can still kind of filter it down to like the ten things that you're interested in. So
Exactly.
something
Exactly.
that looks like this, which is awesome. I think there's, like I mentioned, I think there's a lot of value in that, and just seeing how your workspace is set up modularly, and seeing if there's some changes you should be making to that as well. But yeah, I'll let you continue with your point, Nero.
Yeah. Also, I mean, one of the obvious things with making the wrong assumption is even if you have everything in the same framework and you have kind of like same vertical, so there's no really uh, kind of problem that something can be connected in the wrong way. You could always make, for example, a circular connection. So, for example, admin can point to sales that then points to shared, and then shared can point back to sales. And suddenly you have circular dependency. And how would you then tell your bundler how to bundle these things? Because you don't know what goes first. Like if you need to build them, which goes first? Like what's built
Yeah.
first? Is it sales or is it shared because they depend on each other?
Right. It's like the chicken and the egg problem, right?
Yeah, and this is
So,
something that by default is being checked by this rule. So
mhm,
there are things that you manually have to do, like checking the tags, whether the restrictions apply. But things like circular dependency, that's automatically checked, and not only direct circular dependency, but also a chain of circular dependency. So, for example, if you would have admin importing sales, importing shared, and then shared importing invoices, and invoices importing admin, that would be one cycle. So this is something that would be immediately reported as an error. Also, by the common sense, you should not import applications into anything. So applications should always be on top. You can then link features to another feature, or have utilities importing other utilities, or even importing features if that's how you like it. But application should always be on top, because application generally has routing, it has state management, and you don't want this to be imported somewhere else and then carried over to some other application,
yeah.
because it could mess up the entire application. So you always want to make sure that your application is on top of the food chain.
Right.
And this is
So,
also set by default.
yeah, just to pop up the stack a little bit too, Miro. So the way that we like have this mechanism to show, hey, there's the circular dependency, or there's this you have your tags set up this way, but we see a violation here. The mechanism for doing this is the ESLint rules that we use, correct?
Yes, exactly. We have this also for TSLint, but as TSLint is deprecated, the rule is still there and you can still use it if you have TSLint in your solution, but we advise you to migrate to ESLint if you haven't already. And additionally, all the new improvements will only land in the ESLint rule.
Right. So, looking at the configuration here. So, in your article here, I'm looking at the rules for the NX enforce module boundaries. So, just by using NX, we already have the lint rule for the circular dependency, but here we're specifying here's the rule for enforcing module boundaries, and inside of the configuration for this rule, this is kind of how we're allowing ourselves to set those constraints, like applications should only depend on libs, and we can see the various the tags here would also come into play, where I believe the way it would work is you tag the specific library. So we could say the type of the library here would be a util, or the type of the library would be a feature. And then we can say inside of here we could configure, okay, features should only depend on utilities. Utilities should not depend on features, if that's what we wanted to do. Correct?
Yeah. At the moment, the rule only tells you what tag can depend on which other tags. There's also PR being now still in progress that will enable you also to say what tag cannot depend on what other tag. So like opposite from only depend. So currently there's only depend on libs with tags, and there will be not depend on libs with tags. So instead of specifying all the tags it can depend on, you can specify what are the tags that you specifically want to ban.
Right. So here's the only depend on libs with tags. Hopefully that's
Yeah.
that's large enough for people to see. Sorry about that, Shachith. But yeah. So right now we only support this. What was the other configuration again, Miro? Sorry.
Yeah. So the one that is now still in PR,
Okay.
one person from community is working on it, is to also add option to specify not depend on libs with tags. So opposite from this. So instead of specifying all the tags that it can depend on, we specify all the tags it cannot depend on.
Cool. That's awesome. So sort of
Yeah,
like
we
a
generally the only depend on libs with tags should cover most of the cases, but there are scenarios where you want specifically to specify what cannot depend on, and then this would help some folks out. have less configuration. Otherwise, you have to specify all the possible tags that certain tag can depend on.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Let me throw up here too. So I'm just pulling in from the link that I shared. I'll highlight that here again as well. But we have the official NX docs here on the subject, where we can we kind of spell out for, if you're looking to implement this by yourself as well in your own projects. Oops. Let me make that a little bit bigger for folks. You can look to our documentation for more resources on how to do this. So like this is how it would work for a specific project, and this again depends on if you're using like the single project config file or the one giant config file at the root of your monorepo. But for whatever project it is, this is how you would specify a tag, just by this tags property inside of your project's object. And this is what one tag would look like. So scope client. This is just convention, the sort of domain colon and then the type. I think you can provide any string here.
Yeah, exactly. These are like your Instagram hashtags, so you can put whatever tags. You can say Zack rules, and that would be your tag. Doesn't really matter.
Zack does rule.
Kind of convention that we use is to define the vertical tags as scope and define horizontal tags as type. So like type app, type util, type shared, type feature. But you can come up with your own rules or your own syntax however you please. It doesn't really matter. It's at the end of the day, it's just a plain text.
Yeah. If you wanted to add some other dimension to this, like the business or the domain, some other domain, that's an additional dimension on top of that. You could add that, by your own convention as well. And just to call it out too, if there's the way that NX dependency graph works is we're going to rely on your actual imports, so your actual source code, to construct the graph of how libraries interconnect in it, as well as how apps connect to libraries. But if there is ever sort of we call it an implicit dependency. So this is a dependency that doesn't rely on an import or that you can't see via source code. So the one that we use this all the time for is like for our end-to-end tests. Because the end-to-end tests, we're going to serve up an app and then we're going to run tests against it. But there's actually no link between those two things to make that clear. So we specify it as an implicit dependency. And so I've also used this in the past where it's like if we have a front-end piece of code that's calling an endpoint, but that endpoint is actually also in our monorepo, I'll sometimes include the implicit dependency there as well to say, we can't see it, but this one actually depends on this backend module here. So if something on the back end changes, we can still see that there's a change in the dependency. I'm seeing some questions here. Let me highlight some of these from Sebastian. Can we explain how the restricting transitive dependencies work? So we were talking about this just before. Let me go back to Miro's article.
So tags is just one way of restricting your input. Another way is to ban specific external libraries. So for example, instead of saying that certain library should not depend, for example, if you have an Angular library, that it should not depend on a React library, you can also specify that certain library with certain tag should not be able to import specific packages. So for example, we can say that library that's marked as Angular feature should not be able to import anything that starts or has React in the name. The same way, if you have React vertical, you can say that those libraries should not be able to import anything that starts with @Angular. And the most common issue actually where this all originated from was with Nest and Angular, because both of them have the common module. But these common modules work completely different. But your IDE, usually when you start typing common module, it will offer you to import one or another. And it's quite easy to import the wrong one and not notice this. So this way, your linter will immediately respond and will say, hey, you are trying to import Nest into your Angular project, or vice versa. And this also allows you to import some packages that generally you don't want to be imported in your projects. And on top of that, your dependencies that you have in your project can be divided into multiple categories. The first one is direct dependencies. Then you have developer dependencies, which generally you don't want to find imported in the code. So this is something that helps you during your build, test, lint, or for your developer experience, but it shouldn't be part of your result bundle. And additionally, each of these packages can then depend on some other packages which you bring along when you run npm install. And those then can have other transitive dependencies, etc. So it's actually, as you know, the node modules is full of different packages, while in your package JSON, you maybe have just 20 or 30 different packages. So these are all transitive dependencies. And with banning those, you can stop developers from accidentally importing something that wasn't supposed to be used or wasn't supposed to be part of your solution. Because once something is transitive dependency, you don't know if when you run the next npm install, it will just disappear from your node modules, because you're not explicitly importing this one. You're not explicitly depending on this package to be there. It just happens to be there because one of your dependencies is using it, but this dependency tomorrow can stop using that.
Exactly. Let me highlight another one of Sebastian's questions here. So the question is, can we mark a file as a dependency, like a MDN sitting in a docs folder that is not a library itself? So the advice I usually give here, Sebastian, is when you're using NX, to think of like a library as sort of the atomic unit for these kinds of things. So when we're talking about like the depth graph, for example, we're talking about the graph for how libraries interact. So libraries and projects, we kind of use those words interchangeably. A project, I guess, would also include, it would be the umbrella term for applications as well as libraries. So your project, if you wanted to have like a docs project that's just like a series of markdown files or something like that, nothing preventing you from doing that, where you can create that node in your graph and mark some things as so that doc file could depend on X, Y, and Z other libraries. So if one of those things changes, we should highlight it that it would do something. So yeah. And then obviously, if you're ever importing those markdown files directly, we'll see that. But otherwise, you'll have to use the implicit dependencies we were showing there before. So yeah, do you want to go back to your article here? I thought there was some really good images here on tagging, especially how that relates to the different dimensions. So here's the first image, which showed sort of the dimension highlighted by the colors.
Yeah.
And then we had here, you can see these are kind of, the colors were kind of, I guess, the backdrop. But here we're actually making those.
We can actually see the tags being
exactly
specified that match those colors.
Yeah. So we see the tags just correspond to the colors here, but we're being explicit about it. We're using our config to add these. Each one of these here is listed as a tag. We can kind of go from there. And I think as we progress down the article, you can see now we've also introduced a dimension of, I guess this would kind of be framework, right?
This was just to mark that these might have different frameworks. For example, both Share and Core are just plain TypeScript projects, so they can be imported into anything, but
Mm-hmm.
the other ones, the features and apps, actually have references to a framework and might create an issue if it's imported into the wrong project.
Right. And would you actually create tags for this, Miro, or um, I, I'm actually not sure. Looks like
Yeah,
we
so
go
so
into
we
scope
we
next.
here we just create tags based on a vertical. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, we say that store together with products belongs to a one vertical, and then admin with sales and invoices belongs to another vertical,
Mm-hmm.
and then shared and core are just,
They're
well,
their own things.
shared and core, they're their own verticals.
Sounds good.
You can also specify additional dimension that would be then framework, for example. So if you had multiple of these React verticals and or multiple of Angular verticals, you maybe want to combine them together with a joint tag, specifying that then some of the shared shared libraries can also have, for example, Angular specific stuff, and then you want to make sure that these can only be imported into another Angular features or admins, but not to React. Or if we are talking about front and back end, so you want to make sure that your TypeScript projects are not try to be imported into some .NET backend or Java backend.
Cool.
Yeah, and then here we can see the banned external dependencies. So by fine-grained specification of what should be banned from
Mm-hmm.
importing. And you can, as I mentioned, you can not only specify the full name, but you can use the asterisk to have like a glob that would cover a lot of other packages. So for example, we know that everything coming from Angular team is marked with @Angular / something. Then you can also just use Angular in the name.
Right.
And the same thing goes for React. Of course, you have to be very, very careful with this because some library, maybe for Angular, can be named reactive whatever. Imagine if RxJS would be called reactivex, then the React asterisk would ban this one as well. So you have to be
Right.
a bit careful about this, but you would notice if something stops working or if you get some linting error, then you can improve this this specification for the for banning external imports.
Hey, Nicholas, by the way. Nice to see you, man.
And
But yeah.
if you
So
scroll down a bit, we can see also the part with banning then transitive dependencies. So it's done in similar way as a banned external imports, but it's done not per rule, but on level of the entire rule specification. So it's not per constraint. So if we say we ban transitive dependencies, we ban it for entire application, not for a specific project, because it doesn't make sense to ban it for just single project.
that makes sense. So as we can see here, this is not specifying a source tag. It's not specifying a specific project. It's just saying on the whole ban transitive
On the whole
project.
level, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Well, versus, and this is one thing I wanted to highlight here too, because I thought this was really interesting. So this is inside of the depth constraints of the the larger rule, the ESLint rule here, enforce module boundaries. So inside of the depth constraints, we can see. So going back to the graph we were looking at, I was kind of asking about, well, we see the React icon here, we see the Angular icon here, we see the TypeScript icon here, like those actually don't exist, right?
Yeah.
In reality, like I guess you could kind of like look at the executors or the targets to kind of determine to kind of like backfill what those icons are, but there's nothing about like the core of this that's saying this is an Angular library versus this is a React one. But regardless of that, via these banned external imports, with the caveat you mentioned, like we want to make sure that React one's a little bit unfortunate, right? The Angular one's a bit more. That would be weird if if there was something that matched that. But yeah, we can see for the so this is defining for the store scope. It should only depend on these ones, on these other scopes. So other things with the store, or shared, or core, and also it should not depend on any Angular stuff. So this is kind of marking it almost as that React, or it's saying inside of the store things, there should be no Angular. This is a React
Yeah,
application.
exactly.
So, yeah.
But it's pretty much saying that if someone would accidentally try to import anything Angular in any of the scope, well, in any of the store projects, there would be an issue, or in shared or in core.
Right. And the way you'd see that, again, just popping all the way back up the stack, is you'd see in your IDE you'd see the ESLint error on the import. You'd also it would be flagged inside of your CI that would fail your linting, so you'd be able to see it that way.
Hopefully, yes. So folks, don't switch linter off, because it might give you important information about your solution.
Yeah, the linter is the mechanism by which we're doing all this stuff. So make sure you have that linter.
It happens quite often that people just switch off the linter because they migrated some old repository, and then it has too many linter issues to fix, and they keep postponing that. But please don't.
Or just run it locally before you create the PR or something like that. We have those things because it's for the automation. That's like driving modern development. That's the argument I would make. Let me highlight some of the questions here from Sachith. This may not be related. How can libraries vary by the buildable tag? So this was actually an interesting point I was hoping we'd get to a little bit, because this is like another interesting dimension of how this all comes into play. Will it change the libraries used by remote apps, build time, and runtime? So Miro, do you want to get into this one a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we can set libraries to be either buildable or not. What that generally means that if library is not buildable, that means that itself, when we run the build of the application, it doesn't produce any output. So nothing will be generated in your dist folder. So the library that's not buildable only makes sense as a part of something bigger. So for example, app. In most typical scenario, you have app that imports a lot of libraries that are not buildable, and they're all bundled together into single bundle or single build. And this, from one hand, it simplifies the whole process. But since the library is not buildable itself, that means that it's also not separately cacheable. So it's only cacheable as the whole group. So when you run the build, only the parent app, along with all of its linked children, will be then bundled together and saved in a cache. But the single library itself will not be saved. So if you want to increase the granularity of your caching, then you would probably want to have the application buildable. But as I mentioned, again, this brings some other issues where then your library is slightly bigger and takes slightly more time. So there's always pros and cons to it.
Right. So and maybe getting to this question a bit more too. So that we have the option for having like a buildable lib right now, and you can see that if you're using, if you're using NX console, it'll come up as one of the options. You can like click the checkbox to mark it as buildable. Publishable is another like closely related aspect of this too. Yeah. So like the difference is really what it comes down to, I think, is a buildable lib is one that has like a build target, right? So something that's going to come and build something to put it into your dist file, really. Publishable would then be it's a distinction that actually comes in with Angular quite a bit, because we have to use like the Angular publisher to actually publish a library to make it so we could put it on like the registry so other people can use it. But that would be the idea for a publishable flag, is that, well, if it's publishable, that means it has like, well, you could think of it as, well, it has a publishable target where when you run that, it would go out and publish it to a registry like npm or your internal registry.
One thing to note is immediately what's publishable and what's not is that publishable has package.json, because you specify what are the direct dependencies of this library. Because once you build it, it actually creates a completely built npm package that you can then deploy on npm, for example.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in order to do so, it has to be buildable, of course. So it has to be able to build it in isolation from everything else.
Right. So it's like it's an interesting dimension we can build into this conversation a little bit, I think, just in terms of, well, I don't know if this makes sense that much for Angular, but at least in like in the Node sense, one of the pieces of advice we often give to people is think of your libraries as like a Node module that happens to live inside of your repository. And if you actually do think of it that way, and you go to the step of actually making each one of these libraries buildable by themselves, you can actually, I think there's potential there to further optimize the depth graph, where we're saying, well, if this, affected still comes into play, but if we have a library that's buildable, then theoretically we could just import the built asset as opposed to importing the source code and having to do another compile step or another build step on top of that. So yeah, just an interesting aspect relating to Sachith's question here. So yeah, anything to add, Miro?
No, yeah, that would be all.
Cool.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting dimension, and there's I think there's some more cool stuff we can do with this in the future with NX as well. But yeah, thanks for the question, sir. For Sebastian here, can you see tags on the depth graph UI? I believe so. I think that was one of the things that Philip had put in recently. Do you happen to have the example that you were going to show, Miro? Could we show the depth?
Yeah, I can try to share the screen and run the graph to see.
Sounds good.
What's in it. Okay, so let's run this. Let's show all the projects.
You get to add it?
There are tags, but they're not visible unless I'm... yeah, when you click on it, then you can see. So you can see here, this is tags feature.
Yeah, could you also zoom in on that a little bit more? Sorry, it's hard to see it.
I'll try, so hopefully that's big enough.
You can kind of make it out. But yeah, it looks better if you run it locally. Yeah, you can see sort of the tags.
So yeah, you can see that this one has, these three are tagged as a feature. This one, test one as well. And this one is tagged as a core feature. And this random doesn't have any tags, and neither does this end-to-end test, and this is also empty. So we have tags for this one and the linked features. Now this also allows us to, let me go back to the solution. So this allows me, for example, to specify now in my ESLint to say that every library can depend on any library. Could you
zoom on that a little bit more, Miro? Sorry. I know it's so big, but it's having a hard time coming through. There you go. Thank you.
So here we can see this default setting that any tag can depend on anything. And this is important because we saw that a couple of those projects didn't have tags. So if I would remove this, I couldn't import anything into the application because application doesn't have tags, so it cannot specify what can depend on what. But for the rest of them, I can say that the core feature can only depend on libraries that are marked as features. So if we look back what graph looked like, let me zoom in this. So we can see that we have this core feature that can then depend on features. Now, if I would run the lint here, let's see, run many, target lint. We don't need to skip the cache, but we want to run the lint for all. As you can see here, everything was successful.
Could you press up just to show that again? I was hiding it with the question there.
Yeah. So this is command for running lint on all the projects.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can see here that it was also taken from the cache because I didn't make any changes in between those two runs. So yeah, everything came from the cache. Now, let's say if I go to one of these projects and I change the tag, for example, let me go to this test one and say that this is not feature. It's actually
not feature.
Not feature.
Yeah.
So if I look into
so
it,
this is taking, I'm sorry, this was taking test one and we're going into the specific project configuration for test one and changing it. So it's not, it is now a not feature. It's not a feature. Right.
Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier, this tag specification can either live in your project JSON if you have one, if it's specified on a library level, or it can be in your angular.json or workspace.json, depending on whether you're using Angular or you're using some other frameworks.
Yeah.
But you can see our Angular JSON is quite flat now because all the configuration is in project JSON.
Yeah, so this was an enhancement. Did this come in with 12? I think it was 11 or 12, but it allows you to
12 something, yeah.
Yeah. So this will allow you to before you had like this, either your workspace.json or your Angular JSON would be thousands of lines of code long, and you'd have to
it would be super hard to follow and to figure out what's what. And if you think of a typical Angular JSON, for example, for those that use Angular, you know that how huge this file can become and how difficult it is when you need to find specific things to change. Like if you need to change configurations for one of the projects, it's like you have to scroll down and find exactly if it. And even worse, if you need to change a couple of those projects. With having them collocated with a library, it's way easier to reason about what belongs where. Yeah. So now we have this. Sorry, that wasn't core. That was this test one. So we have not feature. And now if we run it again, we can see that we have a problem. Now I have some console logs that I added because I was testing some functionality. But you can see here the actual error. A project tagged with core feature can only depend on libs tagged with feature. And then we can say that, okay, where does this point to? So it's random core feature, line 6. So we can see that this is our problem. We're trying to import test1 module, but our test1 module is in a project that's not marked as a feature, it's marked as a not feature. Now, one of the things you might have noticed is that if you look at the code, it actually didn't produce any error. It still says everything is fine. And if we look at ESLint, we can see those logs, but there are no complaints. But if I would now restart the ESLint, we would suddenly see the error. And this was a very big problem for us, and it has been there for quite some time. And a lot of people were not happy with this. The reason why this error is happening is, in order to understand why this is happening, is actually I have to explain how the whole rule operates. So as we mentioned, the NX revolves around project graph. Now what the rule does is it takes the project graph where you can see how the projects are connected to each other. And based on that, based on links between different projects, it can see, for example, if project A imports project B, it will take their tags and it will check if constraints that are defined match those tags. If they don't match, like in the case of test1 module, where we see that our random core feature is importing test1 module, but our ESLint configuration says that our random core feature, which has core feature tag, can only import those marked with feature, and our test1 module is not marked as a feature, that will then throw an error. But the issue with this was that in order to gain some performance, we actually load the graph only once. And what this means is that if I'm running in terminal our run many, that means that for each project I'm running, I will load the fresh version of graph and I will run the lint on it. And this works perfectly for terminal. It works perfectly for CI. The issue is in the ESLint being run in IDE, where we generally load the rule just once per session. And then no matter how you change your project, your graph that was created initially stays in the memory and we never refresh it. So it becomes a stale. One of the things that was implemented not so long ago is something called Nxdaemon, which was implemented by James Henry. What this does is it's running in the background and it keeps updating the graph. Because once we run any NX command, we will generate a new project graph and we will store this in your cache folder. So if I go to my node modules and if I open .cache folder, you will see that at the end of it, there's NX steps JSON, which contains the entire dependency graph plus some additional stuff in there. Yeah. And we use this as a base point for our ESLint rule. Now, normally this would become outdated as you change your files in your application. So we introduced first the daemon to keep it updated. And this helped us with those cold runs. So if you do a bunch of changes and then you run NX command, you don't want to wait for the NX to rebuild the project graph. You would ideally like to already have the project graph ready because it takes a bit of time. So we introduced this daemon that is constantly running in the background, and whenever you change file, it will rebuild the project graph and it will save it in dependencies. The issue was with ESLint, as I mentioned, that it does this only once per session. So it doesn't matter that our daemon actually changes the file in the cache folder because ESLint rule wouldn't know about it. And this is how we normally load it. So we check if there's no project graph in memory. Then we're gonna read this NX.json file that loads then all the dependencies, and then we keep it in the memory. So next time the linter is triggered, we'll just check, is it in the memory? It is. Okay, then just use the style graph. And if you look at the output, you just switch to ESLint, you will notice that it only says once loading latest graph, and afterwards it's saying using style graph. And if I would now go here and change something else, you can see it's still using style graph. And no matter what I change here, always style graph. And this is a big issue. So I was thinking, how can we make this always up to date? But we don't want to have this up to date also when running in terminal, because in terminal, we know that while the command is running, the code cannot be changed, or it doesn't matter if it changes because we are already using a specific point in time. So we don't want to slow down our CI and our console or our terminal, but we do want to have our IDE giving us proper results. So I was thinking how to distinguish between these two. And luckily, when we run the command, if we tap into if we tap into arguments that are being passed, we can see who is actually runner. So for all the NX commands, we know that the runner is our Narwhal CLI. And for running it either directly through ESLint or running it from IDE, it will be actually ESLint server that's running the command. So one of the things that I introduced today, which is still in the PR and hopefully it will land in NX soon, is checking whether it's running in terminal or not. And if it's not running in terminal, then we'll constantly get a fresh version of graph. Now, normally when you develop, this is not a big slowdown because as you type in, it will maybe wait a couple of milliseconds, maybe 100, 200 milliseconds for the new graph to be loaded. So the report of an error might be slightly delayed, but it won't be stuck like this. So let's try to run it again. We still haven't. No, it's actually successful now. Let's see how we. This should not be successful. Because it was using the cache. So
yeah,
we would run it future. Let's skip NX cache. Why is this still successful?
Did we change something on the? Did we change something with the ESLint rule to do that?
Check.
I would have thought so. No, the only change we have is that.
No. That's very strange.
Well, it sounds like there's still some kinks to work out on this, but the goal of this at the end of the day is to be able to see the red squigglies there as we're developing inside of our IDE. So we don't have to wait until like CI is run or until we happen to run a command that's going to redetermine that depth graph for us, and in order to become aware that we're now violating that constraint. So that's an awesome enhancement, and I hope we can get it figured out soon. So
yeah, exactly. Let's just try if this works. So if I
and just to highlight the JS UA's comment, refresh lint server. The whole goal of what Miro's trying to do here is to make it so you don't have to always be refreshing that lint server in order to see these kinds of errors. So, but yeah, we're figuring it out here. We're doing some development in real time.
I was actually hacking in this file, so probably I just mixed some import. Unfortunately, I won't be able to show it now live.
Yeah. Well, we've got some sneak peeks for some cool stuff.
Sorry, this shouldn't be.
Oh, should that be or?
Or, yeah, exactly.
Let's try it now.
Yeah, well, now it's set to be successful again. So let's try to break it again. Not feature. Yeah, there it is.
There we go. Now we're failing.
There we have the error. Yeah, it's live hacking is usually the best thing to do.
We thought it would just be a very simple demonstration, but we underestimated our ability to
demo
mistake
gods,
and an or. But there, that's awesome.
So
I remember in Miro, for a lot of the workshops we do for NX, there's this issue with the lint errors. You always have to like restart the ESLint server, and there's also like VS Code not getting the imports automatically for the IntelliSense, and both of those have now been patched. It sounds like with you fixing the ESLint server issue here with the enforcing the module boundaries, and if you're using the NX console, we actually snuck that in. John Camasoli snuck that into the NX console VS Code plugin. So now you should be getting really good IntelliSense as soon as you like run a generator, or if you want to
Yeah.
import something from another library. So yeah, let's see another quick question here. We're running out of time, but let's try to hit it before we get out. The expected features to be landed in the next version of NX. Well, you got the one that that Miro just showed here, so that's one. I'm actually I
There was
know.
one more linter related thing is that if you use the project JSON, it wasn't respecting the implicit dependencies, or implicit dependencies weren't set by default. So previously, when we had Nxjson and everything in Nxjson or AngularJSON or Workspace JSON, as soon as you change one of these files, for example, change the tags, your linter would be triggered by this change. But since we moved to project JSONs, we forgot to add this to implicit dependency. So if you change the tags, you would still get the stale version from your cache because your cache wouldn't be invalidated by this change. And this is then also PR that's ready to be merged now, that will add project JSON immediately to the implicit dependencies, so that if you change the tags, it will trigger the cache change, and it will make sure that your project graph is up to date.
Killer. Yeah, and yeah, we're always releasing some new stuff, so I'll stay on the lookout for some cool new features. If you have an idea for a new feature, you can put it in our show notes. I just linked the form. If you have any questions, we try to use these to come up with some cool ideas for these shows that we run. So if you have any questions or something you think could be a interesting conversation, please leave it there. I'm going to throw in our GitHub repo here too. Obviously, if you see any issues or features that you'd like to see coming in NX, please use the issues there. And you can also give us a GitHub star if you haven't already. We like those stars. And yeah. I'm just checking anything else. You see our Twitter handles for me and Miro. I'll throw up the one for the one we monitor for NX Dev Tools. And I think that's pretty much it. If you let me throw the Slack up here as well. So I'm trying to slam all the links into the end because we had such a engaging conversation. I didn't get to bring them up casually for a lot of these, but yeah, for any other questions, please check out one of those links. The community Slack is great. We have some people from Narwhal that go in there and monitor those, but there's also a lot of people from the community who are super helpful and answer questions there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and let me hit Diego's real quick. I think we have a blog article. Column just did a micro front end for Angular that I'm aware of. I think there is someone from the community did one for React micro front end as well. See if I can find those. You probably find them by Googling though, Diego, if you want. I don't have them available to me now, but yeah,
Nice
we're over time.
Diego.
Yeah. Sounds good. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Miro, that was awesome. Thanks for showing us. Thanks for doing some live coding there and fixing all of our lint restarting problems. That was awesome. And
yeah, it was good timing to choose to fix this today.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, we'll wrap things up here, and I'll look forward to seeing everyone here again in a couple weeks. Yuri is going to be out for a little bit with paternity leave, so you're stuck with me, y'all. But we'll have a good time. All right, I'll wrap it up here. See you, everyone.
Bye.